Well, listen, everybody, it's Earth Day Sunday. And so for that and an idea I want to share with you, I want to welcome you to Dillon, South Carolina. You all know, if you've seen this, I'm at south of the border, believe it or not. This is this attraction, they call it. It's called online a tourist trap. You've seen the interstate billboards because they go 500 miles north and 500 miles south. Stop to see Pedro, south of the border. They've got fireworks, a reptile lagoon, a convention center that looks completely closed up. They've got an amusement park. They've got all kinds of restaurants, most of which look completely closed up. A motor inn, a Mexican store, a Myrtle Beach type store, a campground. They've got it all. And Wikipedia and other places online call this a tourist trap because its whole reason for existence is to entice you to get off of Interstate 95 and come in here and spend your money. And I'm going to give you some examples of some of the stuff in the gift shop that makes you wonder. There's an entire display of rubber snakes. I mean, how many people need a rubber snake that badly? Or a fluffy dinosaur, something imported that, costs somebody in China 35 cents to make, and they're selling for $9.95. So you got to be asking the question, what on earth has this got to do with Earth Day? And that's one of the smaller points that I think when we talk about everything being spiritual, and that's what you keep hearing me say, one of the things is our Earth and climate change that's real, but even leave that big stuff beyond and behind us. Look at the small stuff and say, what can we do? We can look at a place like this and we can ask ourselves, how much do we consume? You see, consumption is one of the biggest issues that feeds into all the bigger issues of climate change. And consumption, believe it or not, that's a matter of faith. That's a spiritual issue, very much so. And it's one I want to talk about. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more later on, but for the time being, I wanted to start here at south of the border. I grew up in North Carolina, and you know what? This is the first time I have ever been here. My parents were ones that said, we're not stopping there. And every trip to the beach and back had a mutiny going on in the back seat because my brother and I were desperate to stop here, to spend some of our hard-earned allowance, like I think the 15 cents a week we got as children. And Mom and Dad said no. Dad's term for this was, it's a money trap. And every now and then he would give in and let us stop at one, and we would buy something and it would break in 15 or 20 minutes. And we would be upset. We would pick up from Dad, I wish Dad had never stopped at that money trap. I understand that this is an employer here in Dillon County, South Carolina. I get that. As a matter of fact, at one time, south of the border was the largest employer in Dillon County. You see, the North Carolina state line is less than a half of a mile that way. And in 1950, a man named Alan Schaefer started a beer depot right here. And the reason he started it here and called it South of the Border Beer Depot is because a half a mile that way you're in Robeson County, North Carolina, and it was dry. So everybody was flocking from Laurinburg and Robeson County coming across the state line to buy beer. And it occurred to him, I can sell a whole bunch of other stuff. So he made some trips to Mexico and bought trinkets and kitsch items and things like that. And believe it or not, he ended up sponsoring and hiring 2 young Mexican men to come and work as bellhops in his motor inn. And they called him Pedro. Yes, it's derogatory. Yes, it's racist. In 1950, it was still racist, but eventually, instead of these 2 young men having names, they were both just called Pedro. And that started what's perhaps a dubious tradition. Everybody who works here is Pedro. And yes, the banditos made out of fiberglass, they're kitsch and they're stereotypical and they're a little prejudiced. But this whole thing is built on one idea and one idea alone: consumption. What can they sell you and I, whether we need it or not, to make some money, to pay some salaries, but primarily to make more money? That's the spiritual issue. I want to talk about it a little bit. I want you to see some of this. I'm not going to hang around here long, and then we're going to buckle down and look into the scriptures, Old Testament and New Testament, and see where some of our ideas of consumption are just plain wrong, and we've gotten it wrong for a long, long time. And on Earth Day Sunday, since Earth Day was this past Thursday, if everything's going to be spiritual, if we're really going to believe that, then this is an idea we need to talk about. So, welcome to South of the Border. Let's go look. More importantly, let's go think. Come on with me. In our lifetimes, up to and probably through World War II, here in the United States, the main, probably the overwhelmingly largest economic indicator of how well we're doing in terms of our economy was production. You still hear it talked about today, the gross domestic product. It's talked about, but it means something different than it did pre-World War II, especially in the Depression. How much could we produce? What was our production? In other words, all of our people working, what value and what were we producing for all of that work? That's the way we judged our economy. After World War II, when places like south of the border started springing up, and I'm not just picking on the folks here in Dillon, South Carolina. I've been to Wall Drug in South Dakota, and it is just such a disappointment after seeing billboard after billboard after billboard for hundreds and hundreds of miles, and you get there and it's a soda fountain that's dressed up sort of like the Old West. It was just such a waste of time and such a disappointment. A lot of you have been up to Valley Crucis in the mountains, right? Made the trip out from Boone or from Asheville to the Mass General Store. Weren't you just as disappointed? It's a store selling trinkets, little road signs and things like that, jams and jellies and overpriced shoes. I'm not just knocking stuff like that, but that's part of a shift in culture that happened in the 1950s and the 1960s, where we started matching how well our economy is doing, not by how much we are producing, but how much we are consuming. And the problem with that is that we live in a world that eventually we will consume it all. Back in the 1970s, which today many people said, well, it was a ploy to get more money for oil. But if you remember the gas rationing, that was based in economic issues that were very complex, but at the root of them all was a very real truth, and that is there is a finite amount of fossil fuel on the planet. What happens when we use it all? And one day, if we're not careful, if we don't start to recognize our consumption is out of control, we will. I don't mean to sound alarmist, but that's the reason Judy and I bought a hybrid vehicle. It was one of those small things to do our part, and that's what I'm going to get to at the ultimate goal, hopefully, of this bonus sermon, is to say, what can each of us do? Wherever we are in our lives, old, young, rich, poor, what can we do that might just make a difference? And not do it because we're going to save the planet or because somebody tells us they're going to tax our plastic bags, but maybe do it because we think God would like for us to do it. Do it as a spiritual matter. I have a feeling I'm not being totally fair to Mr. Schaefer's family who still run this place, and to the employees whose paychecks are tied to south of the border. But it is an iconic image, and it's a symbol of this idea that I think it's worth thinking about. It's worth thinking through. Earth Day, especially Sunday after Earth Day, is something that we should think about. I'm going to be reading and talking from the book of Genesis, where I think we made a mistake in how we view dominion over the planet. And I'm also going to be talking about, no, come on.
Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. This is why you edit later on. So I probably needed to take a break anyway. I'll be reading from Genesis and reading the fact that when God told Adam and Eve to be fruitful, multiply, and have dominion over all the earth, we might have misunderstood that. I think we've certainly, in some cases, misrepresented it, especially where you read in Hebrew, there's the word to subdue the planet, which is an odd construction, and then subdue first and then have dominion over. Many of us have taken that and interpreted it to mean the planet is ours to do with whatever we choose. But that runs awry of the entire issue where Jesus talks about stewardship. And the psalmist talking about the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. It doesn't belong to us. It belongs to God. And we are stewards, whether we are good stewards or poor stewards, in that part of the question. And I think we can answer that question more so in places like this than maybe we can sitting in our pews on Sunday morning, which is why I'm here and why I want to think through Earth Day together a little bit. I've got nothing against fiberglass cows and turtles and little men in sombreros. As a matter of fact, I've seen some families pull in here and their kids have flocked to that. And the very first thing they do is start snapping pictures. So they're happy people having a great time here. It's a beautiful day. I just want to use it to think clearly again about this idea you keep hearing me say. And that is everything, even the kind of cheap geodesic dome over at the Pedro Motor Inn at south of the border. Everything is spiritual. All we have to do is look at it, think about it, and think about it faithfully. I'm probably going to show you maybe a few more things to just tie it in. Maybe not. We're going to end up with me talking a little bit when I get back home about how this all fits together. So, if you've never been here before, I don't know, you hadn't missed much. Your grandkids or great-grandkids might like it. But I think truly Wikipedia and some of the places on the internet have got it right. It's definitely is a tourist trap. A money trap? I don't know about that. I haven't spent any money yet. I'll keep you posted how that works. So, happy Earth Day. Let's think through some more. Well, now that we're no longer in Dillon, South Carolina, I don't want to belabor the point, draw it out, and just make this a long video to hear myself talk. The point to get at for each of us, especially when we look at the environment and our stewardship of the earth in terms of consumption, is to ask the question, what can we do? Because oftentimes we feel completely helpless. But before we get to that, I think we need to do a little bit of looking to the scriptures. I've got some stuff pulled up here on my monitor that I want to look at. And I mentioned I want to go to Genesis, and I do want to go to that right away. Because if we look at the fact that Genesis has two creation stories in it, and sometimes people miss that. There are two distinct stories of creation that come from the form source criticism that many of us pastors and preachers were taught, and that is woven into Genesis and Exodus, the first five books of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch. Woven into those are four different streams of thought and writing that were first coalesced from the oral traditions and then written from various points of view. We learned there were the J, the E, the D, the P traditions. The J stood for the Yahwist or the Jehovahist. The J and the Y in Hebrew looked similar. And that was the distinct Old Hebrew tradition. The E was sort of a shorter, the Elohistic tradition. You had the Hebrew word for God. God's name was Yahweh. But Hebrew would never say that, and that was not the way it was spoken of generically. That was the word Elohim, or El. That's the generic word for God. Those were two separate traditions in the Old Testament. There was the D, which specifically was called the Deuteronomistic historian. This was the person that wrote the book of Deuteronomy. Ultra conservative traditions say, well, Moses wrote all the first 5 books, which really gets into a problem when you ask, how did Moses write about what happened after his funeral? And there's a lot of mental gymnastics where people say, well, God gave him a vision of that. The Deuteronomistic historian wrote it, edited a lot of that. So there was the J, the E, the D. The P was the priestly tradition. That was the tradition of the Pharisees and the scribes. And in all of those, they interweave together to form Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the 5 books that we call the Pentateuch. In Genesis, you've got both the priestly tradition and the Yahwist, the Yahweh, the J tradition, with 2 separate and distinct creation myths. In Genesis 1, you've got one of these where you have God blessed them, Genesis 1:28. God blessed them, Adam and Eve, and God said to them, you notice, if you look carefully in your Bible, it will say God, capital G-O-D. That's the Hebrew word Elohim. Okay, so you were looking at the E version there. Elohim blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. There are 2 Hebrew verbs that go side by side there, and one is a rather poor choice of word that a lot of people have grabbed hold to for many, many centuries. We were told to be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. Subdue is the Hebrew word called bash. And it's a primitive root that literally means to tread down. It's got a negative connotation. It means to conquer, to subjugate. That verb can actually mean to violate. God told us, humans, to be fruitful and multiply, and we could tear down the earth. The earth would be ours to do with what we choose, to violate it, to bring it into bondage, to keep it under us, to bring the earth under us into subjection. That was the verb where God says to subdue the earth. And many people said, that's great. Oil, fossil fuels, you name it. We can do whatever we want. It's ours. God gave it to us. But in the Hebrew version there are 2 verbs side by side. There are subdue. The next verb is to have dominion over. That is the verb radah in Hebrew. And that can mean to subjugate, but it also means to rule and to reign over and to take. It actually means that it can be the sense of kingship, of stewardship. Those who have dominion are the ones who are called to rule, but to rule justly. So we've got 2 verbs, and we have to look at both of them. We can't just say the earth is ours, we can do whatever we want to with it. The earth is ours because we've been given dominion over it. That means we have a responsibility to that which is our dominion. And that's where the whole idea of biblical stewardship comes from. In Genesis 2, especially verse 15, you see that, and there it says the Lord God. If you look at your Bible, you will see Lord capped, L-O-R-D, all capital, the Lord God. That means you're looking at the priestly version, the priestly thread in Genesis. And Lord like that with God behind it is used because the word Yahweh was not to be printed. It was not to be spoken by an Orthodox Jew. So here we read in Genesis 2:15, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and to keep it. Those are very important words. Till is the Hebrew word which means abad, and it can literally mean to work the ground, to plow, to till the soil. But that verb in Hebrew can also mean to serve. God put humans in Eden to till the ground, to serve creation. Okay? God gave us every plant yielding seed and told us to till the soil and to keep it. Keep it is the Hebrew word shamar. And that means to guard or to protect, to hedge around, literally. It means to preserve. That word shamar, that's where the very idea of biblical stewardship comes from. It means we are to care for that which we've been given dominion over. When you look back to the creation myth and creation thread in chapter 1, verse 28, we're given dominion not to tread down, to subdue the earth, to do whatever we wish, but blend that in with chapter 2, verse 15, to serve it, to keep it, to preserve it. That's what dominion means. Verse 29 in chapter 1, God gives us every plant yielding seed for food. Did you ever notice in the creation account, there's nothing ever said there about animals for food? Animals pre-fall, pre-original sin, animals and humans are both presupposed to be plant-eating vegetarians. There's a powerful stewardship connotation in that. But if you take both of those together, subdue the earth in terms of dominion, caring for it, having a responsibility to keep it, to serve it, to protect it, well, you've got both chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Genesis pointing to what the psalmist says in Psalm 24:1. And that's the declaration that I mentioned earlier when I was talking to you from south of the border. The psalmist tells us in Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's, and all that is in it, the world, and all those who live in it. When Jesus talks about God in the parable of the good steward and the landlord, the parable of the tenants and the unjust steward, he's talking clearly about this image from Psalm 24, and that is that the earth belongs to God. The earth is the Lord's, and we are given stewardship over it. Dominion, yes, to rule, but to rule with responsibility as God's stewards, not to take ownership. There's not a transfer of ownership for us to do with it whatever we want, even though for centuries upon centuries, far too many people have treated it that way. That's why pollution has been a problem in my entire lifetime. We've done and made great strides since the 70s. We've also reversed a lot recently. Climate change, we can't hide from it. It's real. There's a lot of people that deny it. There's a lot of people that don't believe it. But each and every year we see more storms. We see temperatures going higher. We see climate changes that are all over the map, including harsh weather in winter, because increasing global temperatures can cause more bad snowstorms, more winter storms as well, because the weather is too variable, because the earth is trying to heal itself from our lack of stewardship. If there were ever a thought for us to take to heart on Earth Day, it's that our stewardship of earth is us taking care of the creation that belongs to God, not us. That's the Bible study part of it. I could preach for a long time on that, but ruminate on that. I'll let you go yourself to Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2. Read those, think about them, and think about them in light of Psalm 24. with that in mind, with that as the basis, let's ask the question, what can we do? What can you and I do that somehow makes a difference? Is there something we can do? Sure, there's a lot of things. Some small, but the small things add up. I mentioned it, I think, when I was standing on the overpass at south of the border, that there was a sense of environmental consciousness when Judy and I decided to buy a 2008 Prius hybrid automobile. That conjoined with the fact that, you know what, for the life of that car, so far we've owned it, we cruise past gas stations getting 50, 52, 53 miles to a gallon, and we look at people who are buying muscle cars and we laugh to some extent. Can my car blow away from a stop sign on Wilkinson Boulevard like a Dodge Charger or a Ford Mustang? No. But do I want to do that anyway? No. Same question. That's something we did. Should you do that? No. I don't know. That's your decision. I can't make that decision for you. I wouldn't try to make that decision for you. Back in 2008, 2009, etc., my Toyota Tundra truck that I loved dearly was starting to show its age, and I knew eventually I'd have to replace it. I knew since I have a camper and I have other trailers, I'd need a tow vehicle. At that time, I could not wait for the plans that Toyota was announcing, that they were going to come out with every vehicle in their fleet in a hybrid version, including the Tundra pickup truck. I couldn't wait. I was ready to buy it. They had a prototype made and those plans just went away. Gasoline fell in price. If you recall, back in, it was 2006 perhaps, 2007, in the space of a weekend's time, gas prices went from $2.20 a gallon to over $4 a gallon. I don't know if you remember that. It was September of that year. I remember it. We were towing the camper to Knoxville, Tennessee to go to a football game. And between Charlotte and Asheville, gas prices went up $2. And we had to fill up, and I'm, what's going on here? And if you recall, in the space of 24 hours, it went up $2.50. It took about 3.5 months to come down. And it was blamed on production, and it was blamed on storms, and blamed on this or that. But let's face it, involved in that, always, there's a money thread, always in that. I was thrilled that a hybrid Toyota Tundra was going to come out. It didn't, because all of a sudden it was cheaper to just say, let's let it ride. Let's go back to buying SUVs. Let's buy those big Ford Expeditions or Chevy Yukons, and let's not think about gas prices. And we keep continuing spewing more and more greenhouse gases. The stuff you're hearing right now about climate, the climate summit that's going on, that's real. We can't deny that. So the big ticket items like that, maybe that's not possible. What is possible for each of us? And recognize, you've heard me say this again, something is always better than nothing. Well, I've got a few things that I've done. Here at home, we have a well. We don't have city water. And when we dug this well in 1998, the sediment was so bad that we had to put an entire filter system on the house because there was literally grit coming in our water all the time. That's taken years and years to sort of filter down and subdue, but we still have water with a lot of sediment. So for years, these stayed stacked up in our kitchen and our basement all the time. We used our water from the well to cook with, to clean with, things like that. But when we wanted to make a drink or to have a water, we went through so many bottles of water in our house for 15 years that I'm a little embarrassed to admit it. Every time our recycle bin went out, it was completely full, and it was filled with these things. Until we finally realized, not only is this bad for the environment, it's dumb, it's expensive, and there are better alternatives. So we bought and installed, we paid $50 or so for a water spigot faucet that takes 99% of lead, sediment, all stuff out of it. And we invested in Nalgene bottles. You've seen these, backpackers use them. They've been around all my life. I've got some of these that are probably almost as old as I am, and they're still perfect. So we filter water, and we use the water filter, and we fill up Nalgene bottles, and the top shelf of our refrigerator has bottled water that's been filtered. It's pure, and when we empty them, we wash them out, we dry them, we fill them up again. You have to, it's a rare occasion to see these at our house. Mostly you see a flat from time to time because we're going camping and we're going to take some bottles with us. This is something that we've done. We think it's made a difference. It might for you as well. Even if you do use bottled water, and a lot of people have to, and maybe these aren't an option. Maybe people can't get Nalgene bottles. Please don't throw these in the trash. Recycle them. Even though recycling is getting to where it's expensive and some communities don't want to do it, let's make sure Charlotte, Mount Holly, Belmont, Davidson, where we live, Concord, wherever it is you live, make sure your town realizes we're serious about this. Recycling has to happen. That's one thing we can do. There are others. You notice on Sunday mornings that this is what I sip coffee out of. Actually, you've noticed the whole time we were online, this was my go-to product placement. The reason I buy a QT soda with this type cup is it's not foam. And foam is a one-shot use, and foam is not environmentally stable because it uses petroleum products. You throw it in the trash, it's not recyclable. These, I stack them up because they go in my dishwasher. And I can use these guys 20 times before they finally, deform. I take it back into QT, and they don't quite know how to deal with it. People sometimes take their big mugs and get ice at the QT store. I take their cup back in and get another soda, and they always want to tell me, that's not free, I know that. Well, you could just get another. Yeah, I could. Why would I get a brand new cup when this one's still got a lot of life left in it? So if I've got it in the truck or in the car with me, I go and I refill it. Some stores actually give you a price break for refills. You have to think ahead. But it's small stuff like this that it actually will add up. It mounts up and it makes a difference. We all know the story of these, of course, for a long, long time, and I've kicked myself. The cotton reusable shopping bags. Here's the thing, the cotton ones take more energy to make than do plastic bags. That's true. I don't deny that. These take less energy, and they are recyclable, but you can't put them in the city recycling. You have to take them back to the grocery store, and not that many people do that. So this is what we see blown around on the interstates. This is what we see in trash cans. And whether you're aware of it or not, this is what's going to poison the oceans. You see, plastic bags like this do not biodegrade. Cotton bags, they do biodegrade. Plastic bags will break down, but they only break down into smaller and smaller pieces of plastic, eventually becoming microscopic particles of plastic, but those particles never, ever biodegrade. They're going to be around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. You may or may not be aware of this. In the Pacific Ocean, both northeast of Hawaii and northwest of Hawaii, there are two garbage patches floating on the ocean that are made up mostly of plastic bags, of styrofoam trays, of coffee cups, etc., that have just been thrown away, and they found themselves to the water, and the currents take them, the wind blows them. The garbage patch northeast of Hawaii is twice the size of the state of Texas. Wrap that into your mind. Twice the area of Texas. You would go from Brownsville down on the Mexican border all the way up to St. Louis. You would go west from Houston almost to San Diego. Put that in your mind and imagine that size covered with plastic bags on the surface of the ocean. It's poisoning turtles, it's poisoning fish and plankton. Many turtles eat the plastic particles because they think they're jellies and things like that. Fish eat them, birds eat them. It enters into the food chain, kills a lot of animals. And here's the thing, you and I, every single one of us, we have microscopic plastic in our bodies, every single one of us. And it's eventually going to reach a level where it's toxic. And it's all because we throw these away. Or we don't try to use other bags. Now the plastic bags, you're starting to see these reusable plastic bags. Well, I got this one just last week in Wilmington when we got Smithfield's Barbecue. It can be reused and it's plastic, so it takes less energy than does a cotton bag, and yet it's intended to be used hundreds of times. Is it inconvenient? A little bit. You have to think, are they in the foot of the car? Make sure I've got enough bags when I go shopping. But that keeps us from using these. Is it a better choice? Sure it is. If we all were to do it, would it make a difference? Sure it would. Is it too late for the Pacific Ocean? I hope not. When you look at the photos, you'll realize it's time we do something. We're running out of time to make an effort. It's small things like that. Bigger things are important too. The legislation that our Congress is just now getting to starting to talk about, the summit that our nation is doing with other nations in the earth, that's important. Let's start with the small stuff. I, for years, was a paper towel nut. We had a mutiny in my house almost when my wife started getting the half size, because I go nuts, or I used to, with paper towels all the time. And she said, if you're going to use this much paper towels, I'm going to at least make you use the smaller ones. I was slow on the uptake, but she was right. We could see that in our monthly budget. We're spending far too much money on Bounty, and that's because this isn't the best thing to clean the kitchen with. So we went online a while back and we ordered bar towels. These are literally, that's what they call them, bar. These are what you see at the neighborhood bar where the guy's cleaning the counter with. And we've got a whole huge hamper of bar towels in our kitchen. We still use some paper towels, but spills, cleaning up, we use these. I open the door to the basement. I throw them away down on the basement, and they go in the laundry, and they come back over and over and over. So when I bought a dozen of these for something like $9.95, that was probably 5 years ago, I'm still using them, as opposed to buying more and more Bounty every time I go to the supermarket. It's little things like that that make a big difference. There's one difference we can do, and you saw this back during the COVID crisis when Judy and I had a wild hair to serve everybody a meal and bring it to your homes. Did you notice the trays were not foam? We intentionally bought recycled material, biodegradable trays. We got them with our membership at Restaurant Depot. They were a little extra, and they weren't perfect. We were delayed delivering a few of your meals, and overnight in the refrigerator at Christ and at Mulberry, we came back in the next day and they got soggy, so we had to put your meal in another one. That's what happens when you use paper plates instead of foam plates, but they're better for the environment because the paper is biodegradable. Paper like this can be used again, and it doesn't clog landfills and cause a problem that goes down the food chain with plastic that'll never biodegrade. For a while, I served a couple of churches who made a commitment they wouldn't use any foam products at all. We don't hear much about that anymore. And part of that, again, is because petroleum prices fell. They went back down, and we let it slip our consciousness. I think all of these little pieces need to be something that we develop as a mindset and say, this is a spiritual issue. This is part of my faith life. Taking care of the creation, little small things like this. And slowly but surely we build in an idea through our mindset that becomes habit, and the habit becomes a lifestyle, and we understand what it means to live stewardship. Not stewardship by giving your money, stewardship of the air we breathe, of the water we drink, of the earth we live in, of the temperature that if we don't do something to take care of it before it's too late, we, all of us human beings, we're going to end up being like frogs in that pot where the temperature's turned up slowly, little at a time, and the frogs never realize they're boiling to death. These pieces are something we need to do, and we can make a difference. Now, final thing that I'm going to say, and you rarely hear me say this. Ponder these ideas, and if anything at all strikes you, pick up the phone, call Senator Richard Burr, call Senator Thom Tillis, email them. I email Senator Tillis and Burr all the time. As a matter of fact, Senator Burr, his office at least, or they don't send me form letters anymore. They send me honest emails thanking me for being in communication, understanding we don't agree on everything. If you agree with me, if you think our stewardship is about consumption and we can make a difference, if anything from this crazy video that started at south of the border and is ending with me holding up all kinds of plastic bags and Nalgene bottles makes sense, talk to our representatives, our senators. Send an email to Alma Adams, or if it's Richard Hudson, that's your district, or Patrick McHenry, and say, I'm your constituent. This is important. This is important to us as a matter of faith. We believe it's part of our spiritual life, and we expect you to represent us and serve us about it. It's not too late, according to the scientists, for us to do something about saving the earth. And it's literally saving the earth. It's not too late to address climate change, but we're close. And that's what needs to be said. We're really close. If we get to the point of no return, remember that movie called The Day After Tomorrow? It starred Dennis Quaid. You might want to go rent it or check it out on Netflix, because we're close. And if we get beyond the point of no return, well, sermons like this will be useless because it won't matter then. I think this is a spiritual issue, and therefore I think it's one I owe it to you to say this about, and you owe it to both yourself, to God, to your family, to your grandchildren, maybe even your yet unborn great-grandchildren, to think about it, to ponder it, to pray about it. That's the idea. Food for thought, certainly. So, think about it. Happy Earth Day, because I'm taping this on Earth Day. And my hope is that you will think about it carefully, clearly, deeply. Enough said. Preacher will say amen now. And wish you all well. Hope you're all doing wonderfully fine. We do miss you, those we haven't seen. Hopefully we'll see you on Sunday. So God bless.